Phil Robertson's final chapter was not written in the glare of television lights or the noise of public debate, but in the quiet, difficult space where memory fades and family becomes everything. To the world, he was the unfiltered patriarch of Duck Dynasty, a man known for blunt truths, unwavering faith, and a life shaped by the Louisiana swamps. To his family, however, he was something far more complex: a husband, a father, a man who had stumbled, rebuilt himself, and spent decades trying to live according to the convictions that defined him. When news of his death in May 2025 spread, grief was expected. What no one inside the family anticipated was how deeply his final decisions would cut into their understanding of him. The decline that led to his passing had already reshaped daily life long before that moment, but the true emotional weight came afterward, when words he had prepared in silence were finally read aloud. What emerged was not just the story of a man dying, but of a man carefully preparing his family for a world without him. Every decision, every letter, and every line of his final instructions revealed a layered legacy built on faith, struggle, controversy, and redemption. And as his family listened, they began to realize that Phil Robertson's greatest message may not have been spoken in life, but left behind in writing. The slow fracture, Phil Robertson's decline. The early signs of Phil Robertson's decline did not arrive all at once. Instead, they appeared in fragments that were easy to dismiss at first. Misplaced objects, repeated questions, and brief lapses in conversations that once flowed with certainty. For a man known for commanding attention with conviction and clarity, these changes were subtle but deeply unsettling. By late 2024, the family could no longer ignore what was happening. The diagnosis of early-stage Alzheimer's disease confirmed what they had begun to fear. But even that label did not fully capture how quickly things were changing inside their home. The progression was not slow and predictable. It was uneven and disorienting. Some days Phil seemed like himself, speaking in familiar rhythms and offering the same direct humor he had always been known for. On others, he struggled to finish thoughts or recognize familiar routines. For his children, watching this transformation was particularly difficult. The man who had once built an entire business with his hands, who had hunted in storms and spoken without hesitation in front of millions, was now dependent on reminders for simple daily structure. Conversations shortened, fatigue set in more quickly. Even moments of clarity were often followed by confusion that arrived without warning. Yet even as his cognitive strength weakened, something else remained intact: his emotional steadiness. Phil had long viewed life and death through a spiritual lens, and that perspective seemed to anchor him even as his physical and mental condition shifted. While his family struggled with the reality of decline, he appeared to accept it with a calmness they could not fully share. Final days, a quiet departure at home by April 2025. The family's private reality had become impossible to separate from the public narrative, slowly forming around Phil Robertson's health. On the Unashamed podcast, his son Jace offered a brief but emotionally charged update that confirmed what many had suspected. Phil was not improving, he was fading. Daily life had become a process of care rather than conversation. Simple tasks required assistance, and extended interaction became exhausting for him. The strength that once defined his physical presence was visibly diminished. Even so, his demeanor remained consistent in a way that surprised those around him. He was not fearful. He was not angry. He was, in many ways, still anchored in the belief system that had shaped his life for decades. On the morning of May 25, 2025, Phil Robertson died at home at the age of 79, surrounded by his family. The moment was not dramatic or chaotic. It was quiet, almost still, marked more by absence than by action. His passing closed a long and complicated chapter that had been unfolding for years. The announcement was shared first by his son Jace, followed by messages from Willie and other family members. Each statement carried the same tone: grief balanced with gratitude. There was sadness, but also acknowledgement of a life they believed had been lived with purpose, even in its imperfections. The will reading: silence behind closed doors the day after the funeral. The Robertson family gathered in a lawyer's office in West Monroe. The expectation was straightforward: a legal reading of assets, a distribution of property, and a formal closing of financial matters. What they encountered instead was something far more personal. Phil Robertson had left behind handwritten letters for each family member. The documents were not polished or typed. They were imperfect, written in his own hand, reflecting the physical decline he had experienced in his final months. Yet they carried unmistakable emotional weight. These were not just instructions. They were reflections, part apology, part guidance, part farewell. Each letter paired material inheritance with personal meaning, tying financial decisions to emotional intent. The estate itself, estimated between $10 and $15 million, was significant, but it was not what defined the moment. Miss Kay received the family home, a place tied to decades of struggle and survival. His sons received portions of the Duck Commander business, along with messages emphasizing responsibility and continuity. Willie's inheritance included controlling interest, paired with a directive focused on preserving both the business and its values. His daughter Phyllis received land and a deeply personal acknowledgement of a relationship that had been discovered later in life. As each letter was read, the atmosphere in the room shifted. What began as procedural quickly became emotional. The family was not simply dividing assets. They were confronting the full emotional architecture of Phil Robertson's life. The meaning behind the inheritance, what made Phil Robertson's final instructions so impactful, was not the distribution itself, but the reasoning behind it. Every allocation carried context shaped by history, belief, and personal reconciliation. Duck Commander, the business that began as a small workshop operation, was never just a financial asset in Phil's mind. It represented survival, discipline, and family unity. For Willie, receiving controlling authority was not simply a transfer of ownership. It was framed as stewardship. The responsibility extended beyond profitability into cultural and spiritual preservation. Other children received roles tied to continuity rather than wealth alone. Phil's handwritten notes repeatedly emphasized tradition, faith, and the importance of maintaining identity in the face of change. Even his acknowledgments of strained relationships were framed through reflection rather than regret alone. Miss Kay's inheritance stood apart in its emotional clarity. It was not just property, but recognition of partnership across decades of hardship, early poverty, and shared resilience. The language in his letters suggested not entitlement distribution, but gratitude. The slow vanishing, when strength begins to fade in the months before Phil Robertson's death. The change in him was not sudden enough to shock the family at first. It was gradual enough to be rationalized. A missed detail here, a repeated question there, moments of silence that lingered a little too long. For a man who had spent his life projecting certainty, these cracks felt almost unreal. The diagnosis of early-stage Alzheimer's disease in late 2024 gave a name to what the family had already begun to fear, but it did not soften the experience. Instead, it clarified it. What had once been occasional confusion slowly became a pattern. Conversations that used to stretch for hours became shorter, interrupted by pauses where thought seemed to drift away before returning. Even physical routines began to change. Tasks that once required no thought now needed guidance. Family members quietly adjusted their expectations, not out of acceptance, but necessity. The man who once thrived in independence was now living within a structure of care built around him. Yet, what stood out most during this period was not confusion, but calmness. Phil did not resist what was happening in the way others might have expected. Instead, he leaned into the same belief system that had guided his life for decades. His faith, long spoken about in public, became something deeply personal in private. The last gathering, what was said in the room after goodbye the day after the funeral, did not feel like closure. It felt like transition into something unfamiliar. The lawyer's office in West Monroe was quiet in a way that amplified everything unsaid. Chairs were arranged formally, documents were prepared, and yet no one in the room was emotionally ready for what was about to unfold. The expectation was procedural: distribution of assets, legal confirmations, final signatures. Instead, what emerged changed the tone entirely. Phil Robertson had left behind handwritten letters for each member of his family. Not typed, not dictated, not filtered through legal language, but written in his own hand, uneven and visibly affected by illness. Each letter carried more than instruction, it carried tone, memory, and intention. The family quickly realized these were not standard estate documents. They were conversations he could no longer have in person. Every page reflected a different relationship, a different history, and a different kind of reconciliation. Some letters carried gratitude, others carried correction. A few carried quiet acknowledgement of distance or misunderstanding, but all of them shared one consistent theme: responsibility beyond inheritance. The message was not just about what they were receiving, but what they were expected to continue. Built before fame, the life that shaped the legacy before television, before controversy, and before cultural recognition. Phil Robertson's life was defined by scarcity and survival. Growing up in rural Louisiana meant learning early that comfort was not guaranteed. Food came from hunting, work came from necessity, and stability was something created rather than inherited. This environment shaped his identity in ways that never fully changed, even after wealth arrived. Independence was not a preference. It was a principle formed through experience. That mindset followed him into every stage of life, including his brief time in athletics at Louisiana Tech University. As a college quarterback in the 1960s, he showed real potential. His backup was Terry Bradshaw, who would go on to become an NFL legend. Yet Phil chose not to pursue professional football. The decision puzzled many, but for him, it was consistent with how he defined freedom. He valued control over his own life more than the structure of professional success. That same philosophy carried into the creation of Duck Commander in 1972. What began as a small home-based operation making duck calls slowly evolved into a business built on persistence rather than expansion strategy. The early years were financially unstable, but the family endured through shared effort. Miss Kay played a central role in sustaining the household during this time, balancing parenting and survival while the business developed gradually. The foundation of what later became a multi-million-dollar brand was not ambition alone, but endurance under pressure. Origins in the Swamp where everything began to understand the weight of Phil Robertson's final legacy, the family often returned in memory to where it all began, rural Louisiana. His upbringing was defined by scarcity. Food was not guaranteed. It was hunted, gathered, and earned. This environment shaped his world, long before fame ever entered the picture. He later earned a football scholarship to Louisiana Tech University, where he played as a starting quarterback in the 1960s. His backup was Terry Bradshaw, who would go on to achieve NFL fame. Despite this opportunity, Phil made a decision that would define his identity more than any athletic achievement. He left football behind. His reasoning was simple in his own words. He preferred the freedom of the swamp to the structure of professional sports. That decision, which puzzled many, reflected a deeper prioritization of autonomy over recognition. In 1972, he turned that same mindset into Duck Commander, a small business built on hand-crafted duck calls. The early years were marked by financial struggle, with the family relying heavily on perseverance and resourcefulness. Miss Kay played a central role in sustaining the household during this time, raising children while the business slowly grew. Fame, conflict, and the public identity, the arrival of Duck Dynasty in 2012, transformed Phil Robertson's life in ways no one in the family could fully predict. The show turned a private family business into a national spectacle, drawing millions of viewers and turning Phil into a cultural figure. Audiences were drawn to his unfiltered manner of speaking and his strong religious convictions. However, fame also intensified scrutiny. In 2013, a controversial interview sparked widespread backlash, leading to suspension from the network and public debate across the country. The controversy highlighted the divide in how Phil was perceived, either as a symbol of conviction or as a figure of intolerance, depending on perspective. Through it all, he remained largely unchanged in his own stance, insisting his beliefs were grounded in scripture rather than public opinion. While the show's popularity eventually declined, the cultural impact remained. The Robertson family expanded into multiple projects, but the original series had already cemented Phil's place in modern television history. Faith, redemption, and the inner transformation before fame and controversy, Phil Robertson had already lived through a period of personal collapse. In his early adult years, he struggled with alcohol, instability, and the strain it placed on his marriage. Those years left lasting marks on his family. His eventual conversion to Christianity became the turning point that reshaped his life. It was not treated as a symbolic shift, but a foundational one. From that moment forward, his identity, decisions, and public persona were deeply rooted in faith. He often spoke openly about his past failures, framing them as part of a larger narrative of redemption. This perspective influenced not only his personal life, but also the way he approached business, media, and family relationships. Even in his final months, as illness progressed, his expressions of belief remained consistent. For his family, this continuity became part of how they understood his legacy, not as perfection, but as transformation sustained over time. Conclusion: the legacy left in silence after the funeral and the reading of the will, what remained was not resolution, but reflection. Phil Robertson's death marked the end of a visible era, but not the end of his influence within his family. The letters he left behind functioned less as instructions and more as reminders of identity, responsibility, and origin. They forced each family member to confront not just what they had inherited materially, but what they had inherited emotionally and spiritually. In the end, his legacy was not contained in wealth, television fame, or public controversy. It existed in the tension between all three, shaped by a life that moved from poverty to prominence, from failure to conviction, and from private struggle to public identity. What his family ultimately received was not just an estate, but a final attempt to remain present in their lives after death had already taken him away.